Greetings sailors and welcome back to World of Warships, and a slightly unusual replay of mine in that the focus isn't really on my gameplay or the ship, but rather what's happening with my team. Now this is both the best and worst game I had yesterday because it was a bit of a rough day overall. Some of the games I played that, one or two of which I might have wanted to use, I can't because they were in test ships, and of the games I played today, of which there were fewer, again, a decent chunk of them were in test ships, and the others that I played weren't really what I would consider highlight worthy. And ordinarily this game on its own I wouldn't consider highlight worthy either, but I don't know, it gives me a chance to talk about teams in a way I don't usually talk about, so I thought I would stick with it and hopefully this somehow works. So immediately, this hasn't been the best start, possibly not the wisest start from me, certainly pushing up in what is a very unstealthy cruiser, and I thought I was going to get away with it just on the basis of course, having smoke. But then it turned out they had one of their radar cruisers there as well. And you might notice the ZF-6, who had actually spawned on this flank, had obviously been very obviously heading for the middle from the moment they spawned. So probably I should have done the same, but I first off didn't want to leave these battleships hanging, and I didn't want to leave this flank entirely uncontested. But it really hasn't worked out, especially as I opened fire on that Nevsky at the point where I wasn't actually spotted anymore, and once again, you know, got unspotted and then opened fire. So I've lost a fairly huge chunk of health at this point, and now somebody is just close enough to spot me. It might be the destroyers popped out their smoke, or oh no, there we go. It was probably one of the battleships then, seeing as how the Nevsky's behind an island. So yeah, not a great start from me, absolutely not. I'm not going to claim this was some genius move that, you know, it was everybody else's fault that this went wrong, but overall it was what I thought at the time was kind of an acceptable risk, but turned out to be really not worth it. So I've got a bit more distance now. I'll pop to spot a plane. In theory I can do a bit more dodging at this point and try for some more long-range fire. Now I'm going to point out a couple of things on the minimap at this stage. We have 3 destroyers, 2 of which are currently going for cap circles, and the third, a pink Ognavoy, who is behind the island on H5, which is pretty close to where they spawned. That Ognavoy really isn't going to move very far from there at all, and I have a theory about this player in that basically they are trying to ride out their team damage penalty period by simply doing nothing. And so we're really not going to see anything from that player. We are already in this game effectively a ship down versus the enemy team. We are 11 versus 12. That Ognavoy might as well not be there, and I'm certainly, as you can see, not the only person on the team that has noticed this. However, it's not looking too awful otherwise. We have got 2 of the 3 caps, but then I noticed this nonsense going on as well. This Minotaur, who decides to start team damaging our Asashio, and has very quickly reached the threshold where they turned pink and is now busily nuking their own health, as well of course as taking some of the Asashio's health as well. So this is just suddenly going from okay, maybe this is not too bad, to what the hell is going on here. Now if you've been paying attention to the chat, you'll know that the Minotaur was the one angrily demanding smoke, and basically had come up into the cap, and at the point where they're in the cap had started demanding smoke from the Asashio, and upon not for waiting very long, upon not getting any kind of positive reply, immediately started team damaging that Asashio. So okay, now we're down to half health on one of our destroyers, and it's nothing to do with any enemy action, it's entirely as a result of another teammate. This is not looking so gravy. At this point, I think I was starting to maybe get a slight sinking feeling, but we haven't really lost that many ships so far at the moment. Okay, it's a couple of idiots. We've got somebody who is conscientiously objecting. They're adopting a Buddhist playstyle in their destroyer, except really, no, they are in the game. They're just effectively AFK because they're riding out their team damage penalty. They don't even have a camo on. This is entirely purposeful. And over in the other cap, where there's not that many enemy ships, we have a decent part of our force power weakened just by sheer din of one person team damaging another person and thereby taking off half their own health in the process. And now we've also lost the ZF6, who was the only destroyer who hadn't really done anything, you know, to sink the team's chances. Not that the Asashio especially has either. It wasn't their fault that the Minotaur turned out to be an idiot who's now taken themselves out the game by doing yet more team damage to the Asashio. They actually managed to kill themselves. That's what that message popping up was, and that's why there's now a -1 on the team. So that's grand. That was 2 players effectively that we didn't have compared to the enemy team, and with just the amount of team damage done to that Asashio, now they're being buzzed by enemy planes. The Midway's just nuked them as well. So excellent. That's 3 ships down, and it's really down to just a few players. This is the point where it starts to look like it's really going wrong because we have nothing in place to defend the C cap. We have a couple of awkwardly placed ships near the B cap, and because we were forced to fall back from the 1-2 line because we didn't have any destroyer over there, and I kind of wish the ZF6 had stuck around at least on that side, or we'd had some carrier support or something, but they're now going to have all those still relatively healthy ships pushing through from A. Sometimes you get teams that just don't want to win, and it's not like this is one of those games that was a complete wipeout, a complete ruffle stomp. I'd certainly had games like that yesterday, and probably 1 or 2 today as well, either winning or losing, where the enemy team loses maybe 1 ship, 2 ships, and wipes out all of your ships, or vice versa. Those generally aren't particularly satisfying games, but they're also not particularly remarkable games. This, however, a game where people are fighting, it's not a complete ruffle stomp, but just a couple of players end up being rather critical in throwing things just through, I don't know, idiocy and dickheadedness, I guess. That's a rather more frustrating prospect. And so when I say this is both the best game and the worst game, well, that's the worst aspect covered, certainly. The best part, well, this ended up being one of the best damage games, if not the best damage game I had of the day. And it wasn't even that great damage-wise, so you can maybe glean somewhat out of that how the rest of my games were in comparison. I think my win rate yesterday was something like 30%, if that. It was just one of those days. And so when I got to this game, with how it was going by this point, this was pretty much, you know, the straw breaking the camel's back, and certainly one of the big reasons why I didn't play nearly so much today. Because some days your teammates just tell you to go and have a break. Some days it's the right thing to do to put the game down, to walk away and say, right, that's enough, let's not do that anymore, there's not any point, it's just going to cause me unnecessary frustration. I did have maybe a notion that I could perhaps do something about this cap, maybe try and push back in and take it, but yeah, it was, I think, possibly a vain hope. I mean, they're taking the middle now. It's our last cap. We have very few ships left. The enemy team has a clear ships and points advantage at this stage. It's pretty unsalvageable. And it's not like it looked that way from the start. We're over 10 minutes into this. Usually with the landslide games, it tends to happen relatively quickly. But this one just felt, I don't know, unnecessary. And it was just because of a couple of my fellow players deciding that they didn't either want to play the game or that they were just going to be dicks and effectively remove themselves from the game, as well as severely damaging an ally. That Ognavoy, by the way, they've just parked up at this point. I was severely tempted to tell the enemy team exactly where they were, but not that it matters, they've actually been spotted. They didn't even bother to smoke or anything like that. They were moving around a little bit at first, and then I strongly suspect they just went away from the keyboard. So, yeah, sadly the most you can do is just report somebody in the in-game report system. There isn't much more one can do about it. I have in the past put in support tickets. I don't know if that does anything. Maybe I'll do that after this video. Who knows? But yeah, there's not really a lot to stop people doing that if they're pink. And this is one of the things, one of the proposed team damage change things at least will be good for, in a way, because people who turn pink like that will be forced to actually ride out their punishment period, if you like, in co-op. So they won't at least be able to pull stupid stuff like that in random games and effectively put their team at a disadvantage. And of course the other change that would have happened if the team damage changes were in place as of now is that the Minotaur would not have been able to do any damage to that Asashio. They only would have damaged themselves. So I suppose in an indirect roundabout way, maybe I could have started off talking about that at the start of this, because it is actually a quite a good illustration of two reasonably big benefits of the changes that Wargaming is proposing as regards the changes to team damage. Of course, it's not entirely all upside, as I was talking about with Atam in the Community Contributor podcast. It might well encourage people to take much riskier behaviour with torpedoes, for instance. Except it kind of won't be risky anymore, because it won't be doing any damage to allies, but it might be risky to you, the player, because if you trip over that threshold, you'll still be doing damage to yourself. Anyway, nearly 120k damage. Confederate, one of the few surviving ships. Yeah, that really didn't have to go like that. But sadly, because of the actions of the Ognavoy, of the Minotaur, it actually did go that way. And even though some of the ships on the team clearly weren't pulling their weight anyway, we would have had a hell of a lot better of a chance without the two players that were, well, in one case, effectively working for the other team, you know, full stop. With not only severely damaging an ally, but also taking themselves off the team roster as well. So, yeah. Anyway, we all have days like this, of course, and if anything, this is one of the reasons why I've been taking kind of a break from streaming Warships, and I've been so hesitant and so slow to get back into Warships, because it's very rare that I can sit and play Warships for long enough, and it's certainly been the case for the last couple of months. If I sit down, usually I don't want to play all that long, because teammates like this, I mean, getting it quite this bad in a single match is rare, but my enthusiasm can sap away rather rapidly. And so if you're in the middle of streaming, there's always that thought of, well, I have to keep streaming, I have to keep going, regardless, and that's I don't know, it's not fun for me anyway, and it probably doesn't result in the best quality streams either. But having said that, I am going to try and get back into streaming a bit more. It just maybe might not be Warships quite so much, I don't know, I haven't quite decided yet. Anyway, this was a bit of a rambling one, a bit of a different video. Hopefully it was interesting anyway, and if you thought so, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video, and of course, as always, stay tuned for more.